thank you for Eden and thank you for Emanuele for being here for this presentation. I'm Paolo from Bologna for Climate Justice. It's a pleasure for us to be here, and thank you to Kua for the hospitality and the participation. I have to say just few things and some point of reference to our road to the day of the 12th of April, which is very important for us. I will tell you why. The 12th of April for us is the day of the Climate Pride. It will be in Bologna, and there are many things we can do from now on to the 12th of April. The first thing, I want to invite you to the Climate Justice University. It's still possible to subscribe until Sunday, I think. Last year it was a very good experience, so we are doing the second edition now. Then we want to invite you to a small experiment for the day, the 16th of March at 2 in the afternoon at Ex Centrale. In Ex Centrale we will have a strange workshop about the sealing, desigillare, taking away the asphalt from a place, which is something that we are going to do several times in the next future. On the 22nd of March there will be a bike riding in the city, in the jungle of asphalt of this city. We will visit some place covered with asphalt, and we will pass by some places that are symbolic for this city, not just because of the nightmarish world that it is being created, but also for the resistances that are that exist in the city. And then the final day, I will tell you once again, the 12th of April. It will be, we think it will be a very nice experience. The people from around Italy are coming, from GKN, from Rome, and from other experiences. There will be again several events before the weekend, the weeks before, so please follow the social network by Bologna for Climate Justice, KUA, GKN, and all the others. I think I said everything. Thank you. If there is any doubt about the English, please ask me also to help. Thanks, Paolo. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Sinan. So the name is Turkish. I live in Lisbon for 14 years. I'm an organizer and not an academic for a very long time now. Both of them. I'm an organizer for a very long time, and I'm not an academic also for a very long time now. Currently, most of what I do has to do with climate, but my previous stuff is student movement, anti-austerity stuff 10 years ago and things like that. I have some sort of one of those fake contracts that are not contracts, so you pass invoice and you get stuff like that. So, and I earn 700 euros a month, and then I do this the rest of the time. Which doesn't, and I also have, I think, 5 court cases because of direct action. So just giving you a sense of like what is, put a bit more content into the space. I am Turkish, but I'm white enough that the Portuguese don't notice unless I speak, so the police doesn't notice most of the time. And the book, so there's a book, it's like here. This is all like not extracurricular, but it's typically anti-curricular activity for me. Like all of these things that I'm doing is kind of in opposition to, wage labor, alienated, whatever stuff. So it's really, it's really distinct. And because I'm an organizer and not an author, it's also going to be very difficult to present a book without like all this tension of like spoiler versus appetizer stuff. So I'm just going to tell you where I come from. And then either that will make sense to you or it won't. Because I guess like you can only solve a problem that you have, or at least that you state, right? You state to have. So where I come from is two very specific situations. Both happened more or less in 2013, 2012, 2013. In 2013, there was this massive revolt in Turkey, in Istanbul. There was a park that was being destroyed, and everybody came to the street. Well, first some people came to the street, then they were kicked out, and some more people came to the street, and eventually 2 million people came to the street. And I also went. I was in Portugal. There was mobilizations in 80 of the 81 districts. I was simultaneously empowered, excited, but also frustrated of like, all these people are here with us now, which they weren't a month ago, but now we don't know what to do with them, in the sense of like, what next, right? Well, how can we make this power into, how can we make this muscle into power? At the same time, more or less at the same time, maybe a year before, there was the austerity protests in Portugal that I was kind of attending, not participating, but like in a still learning Portuguese at the same time kind of level. We put 500,000 people in a country of 10 million, 500,000 people to the street on the same day. And those people were guided to a square where there was a rally, and then they were sent home. And and then there was the evaluation, and of course everyone in the evaluation room, and this was like part of the student movement, something. And I was like, everyone was like really inspired, right? And I was like, we just sent 300,000 people back home. How does this not qualify as like complete failure of leadership? Like this is. How do we think, like, because then those people never came back. Like they came back in 100,000 a month ago, and then eventually, you are aware that there are no anti-austerity movements currently, so that's a proof. And I was like, in both of these situations, I was really very much frustrated, saying, this is not an acceptable outcome of whatever happened. And in both cases, both in Istanbul and also in Lisbon, I was looking at the platform, the stage, like there's some stage and some people are talking, some people are, holding the space. I was like, this is not acceptable situation. We cannot just put people to the street and then back home and everything remains more or less the same. And I felt a very deep sense of accountability about this. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a place of like serious anxiety and frustration with myself. And then there is the climate justice stuff, right? This is the context in which we are. So climate justice, people typically refer to climate justice as a term introduced by the Global South in the discussions of the United Nations, COP, whatever, that kind of stuff, with basically to the standard, carbon dioxide conversation, they add two dimensions. One is to identify who is responsible and who is not, and address the issue as such. So this is distributed responsibility, historical, that kind of stuff. That's one axis that people refer, and the other is the structural aspect. Like climate justice implies structural changes, major policy changes, social transformations, and so on. This is generally how it is presented, the history of climate justice as a term. And that's also where I'm coming from. I guess I'm coming more from the structure side than from the responsibility distribution side, in the sense that, so for me, and for the book, we start with the physical premise of the climate science, which is no emissions in 2050. That means no emissions in Europe in 2030. This is the physical premise from which we start. The more you think about what that means, the more you understand the task. Because the remaining of the conversation after this premise, the rest of the conversation has nothing to do with climate and has to do with power. Right? From that moment, when you understand, like, yeah, in 5 years there won't be any emission in Europe, that's literally like capital destruction, right? You're destroying capital in scales of trillions of dollars, right? That's what you're doing. So the rest is about power relationships, and that is where I'm coming from, right? And it's really daunting, it's really terrifying to say, like, that's what I'm supposed to achieve as an organizer, as someone who is like engaged in social movements and thinking about, like, social mobilization, justice, whatever you want to call it, whatever is your fight, right? You understand, like, if this is gonna happen, if this is the deliverable, if this is in my to-do list, then this can apply to any one of you, because I'm basically telling you, like, by 5 years, entire Europe, probably entire global north, we need to have made our revolutions already, right? That's what I'm saying. And this is very clear to everybody who's coming from this background. So I'm coming from a place of deep anxiety about what we are trying to achieve and what we are doing to achieve that. Yeah, so that's where I'm coming from. And and of course this is really, to some extent, I mean, it's simultaneously like terrifying. You can enter into actual anxiety, not just anxiety about strategy, but like actually in real life you can be paralyzed by this. But it's also understanding how complex a problem that we have, right? Like, the task is not just like, what am I going to do in my neighborhood or in my thematic, whatever topical, whatever I'm working on, but like seriously looking at, like, whoa, wait. Everything is kind of all of a sudden on top of me, right? So, and of course, there's all this complexity, which means that the answer has to be as complex to correspond to what we are suggesting, what the analysis gives. And I think, so the second thing I want to say is about this, like, problem-solving approach of what do we do. And one thing I learned is that the kind of questions you ask and the kind of ambition you put, it depends very much on your organizational context and your social context as well, but typically like movement power context. Your context defines how much, like, what you can consider to achieve, and that means, like, your frameworks, like what is the way in which you are thinking, and also what is, like, available tools around you to work with that. So, like, very simple, meaning, when I say something like carbon no zero emission by 2030, whatever, something like that, is this something that I can do, right? That's the kind of question I'm asking to myself, to my comrades, to my allies. And of course, this question only makes sense if you have a good context in which that question can be asked. So, and that context is partly very much individual in the sense of, like, it happens at the personal level, which is, as in, Che Guevara says, well, actually, I could liberate Congo, and then he just goes there. And then, like, okay, maybe this is not, and maybe I go to Bolivia. The kind of thinking of, like, actually, we can do a lot of things, we can achieve a lot of stuff. So there's that part. But more interestingly, it's the part about, like, the contexts that we are trying to build. So, if you're a woman in Sudan today, your ambition is to survive. So you have to build organization and movement and structure and campaigning so that you survive. Right? That is that is your ambition, because that's first of all, that's your social context, but also it's like your organizational context, like the movement power context. I could say, like, if my friends in Turkey, they're more like Turkish women, they're like, I want to be free in social space. I want to be able to walk on the street without anybody bothering me. I want to be able to go back home at night. That's like, and they think that they can achieve this. Like, they can write down a strategy, tasks, have meetings, and then achieve that. Whereas, for instance, if I'm talking to feminists in Spain, they're more like, my ambition is to be able to define what relationship means for me, like all together. Like, I'm just gonna deconstruct this whole thing and we're gonna start over. That's the kind of question that, when you try to take to some other context, there's like, well, that's not a relevant ambition for that other context. So to get that sense, and so basically what matters now is, about problem solving, you need this context, you need these tools to be able to be playful about a serious, difficult, heavy subject. So the book comes in this context of like giving us a theory of change that is compatible with the complexity and with the urgency. So we respond to complexity with complexity, and it's one of those few. This was very common practice in the 60s. And this maybe a little bit in the 70s. It's not at all now. This book gives answers. So it says like, this is how. And of course, the answer itself is supposed, like the theory of change that we are supposed to have, obviously must be contingent enough to include diversity, include complexity, include ambiguity in it. Yes, but at the same time, we have to be daring enough to come and say like, here's a task, somebody has to deliver it, what's our part in it? So it comes with a theory of change and an organizational structure that can implement that kind of theory of change. And so we kind of look at some existing stuff with some new approaches that come from elsewhere. So maybe some of you may have heard like ecology of social movements, movement ecosystem, that kind of language of like understanding that there are different actors in a movement, different people in the movement, different strategies in the movement, different people doing different things, but in a way that are kind of feeding each other, right? This is also something, first of all, it's factual. Movements always produce ecosystems of like different actors, but it can also be intentional in the sense of like people can decide to build networks and structures around that. So we introduce this kind of concept of getting rid of, leaving the space where we are and reaching to some space where we can breathe. And we use this movement ecosystem literature or approach that has been brewing, and we're actually giving like step by step like what can be done and so on. So that's what I'm gonna say. Of course it's very abstract, right? And that's because then either I'm gonna start reading the book to you, and it's spoilers, but I think Lele will do some of the spoilers, and that's fine. And then as we go on, we can talk more. I just don't like speaking too long. I just want to say one more thing, right in the beginning. So something I want to say now, although you should be saying, the typical speaker guidelines say you have to say this at the end. I want to say it in the beginning. This is not a book. This is a script of a recruitment talk. This is a mobilization talk. It's just written in a piece of paper and we are distributing it. Because at some point we realized that we cannot give that many talks. So it's functionally basically a script, right? It's written as a book, but so it's designed into 6 propositions that we are arguing for. But it comes also with a website. There are social media accounts in 7 different platforms. There are extra articles written by people about, like, as follow-ups to the book. There's a lot of material of this kind. So it's more like a tool for organizing at the movement level. So I'm saying this because I'm here today and tomorrow, and then I'm going to go to Milan, but like, we are very much interested in, as we go along in this conversation today, to understand like, as again, like either this is your problem, in which case let's talk, or maybe it's not your problem, and that's also fine. But if it is, and you would like to, you know, explore a little more, excavate a little more, I'm here tonight, tomorrow. So just to say, like, this is, yeah. This for us is an organizational tool and not just like some intellectual product. And that's where I stop.
Thanks a lot, Sinan. I will do some spoilers indeed, but just because I think that that's going to help the conversation. But first, let me just start with a personal note, because I mean, you use that strategy and I want to dance with this. Because Sinan and I met more or less a decade ago in Portugal, because I started to work there in 2014. But we actually met before. And so the first bit I want to put is that in the organizational assertiveness you are seeing in his intervention, like, you know, you need to be able to detect that he is doing that to recruit you. Like, you know, we can actually, this book is super useful even if you don't agree with 100% of the stuff which is in there. Like, you know, it is really a space for debate and discussion. So, for example, like, you know, he started by saying, in Gezi Park, in the anti-austerity bit of the Portuguese movement, which is one bit of a huge 2011 uprising with its aftermath. So, what happens is, he is frustrated with that, and they see the point, because I was in Canada, so I'm less frustrated because less stuff happened there. But I was in Italy a decade before. Like, you know, I have experienced here in Bologna, in between Bologna and Parma, the anti-globalization movement. So that was big stuff, and the anti-war mobilizations that we desperately need now. Okay, like, you know, they weren't successful. Did we stop the Afghan war? We didn't. The Iraqi war, even less. And right now we are in the position in which we don't even need lies to start wars. You remember the weapon of mass destruction? It was a lie. Right now, they don't need it anymore. That's fine. Let's go to war. Let's react. Okay? So I'm frustrated as well. But not about that bit. Why? Because in 2013, I applied for a job in Portugal, and in my part, like, you know, sociology, they had 5 grades. Okay? And in the end, in the application system, I was 7th. Thank you for trying, like, you know, maybe next year. In 2013, one of the big demonstrations Sinan refers to ended up with sort of like a symbolic siege of the parliament, which wasn't super symbolic because I remember a couple of doors burning, but whatever. The week after, magically, grants doubled. Instead of 5 grants for sociologists, it was 10. And my 7th place became golden. And so it's like, wow, I was unemployed. Some people I don't know, but I already love, and in fact I keep loving you, have done something which have put me in a position to be on the job. You know, maybe some, you know, why do we get engaged? Because I owe them everything, basically. Like, you know, without that job, who knows what I would have done. So, like, you know, we should be frustrated. We should also recall that we have a power when we join, okay? In a movement, in a union, whatever. And this book is full of that. So, it is important, in my opinion, that, like, Sinan started because he likes provocations and I think they work in this kind of settings by saying that, you know, in the European Union, it's stop emitting in 6 years, 5 years, right? 5 years. In the world is 25 years. But what I'm telling you is that the political discussion that this book proposes is totally useful to you, even if you would say, no, it's 2035, or instead of stop emitting, we should redistribute completely the carbon budget which has remained. So don't stop there, okay? I see the point in posing that, because I mean, and I come to the first spoiler, but that's not that much of a spoiler. One of the great merits of the book is honesty in self-criticism. The idea is, maybe the reason why the climate justice movement hasn't achieved its goals, and I think that starting point I'm totally fine with. Like, you know, we are here reflecting on how to be more effective. This is a Machiavellian book, which is a very good compliment I'm doing to the book. The point is, we haven't been effective enough. Not that we have been a complete failure. I think it would be too much to say that. But clearly, we need to do much, much, much more if we want to call ourselves effective in terms of the correspondence between our goals and what we get at. There are moments that the book is clearly not just non-academic, it's anti-academic in the best sense of the word. Like, this book is not a single word is too much. You don't get a nice adjective to make the reading easier or smoother. No. All that is here is necessary for them to be there. And they have some parts in which they discuss, starting from their own experiences, them is Sinan and Mariana Rodrigues, the co-author of the book, in which they reflect about, are we really deeply aware of what we are talking about? Because maybe the fact that we are not can explain partly why we are not achieving what we need to be achieving very soon. And that moment of honesty resonated a lot in me. Maybe it's not that day in which I went home after a demo, but if I, as feminists do, and it's good to do that, when I tend my daughters, my being believes there is a tomorrow. And that's a problem, because we know that's not at all a guarantee. So instead of me being a parent and getting even more angry, it's just like you manufacture something who knows? Maybe we are wrong, okay? And we are not wrong. We can go about details. It can be another year, 2033. It can be, a little bit more, a little bit less of the carbon budget. But the point is that one, okay? Our political realism, existential realism, isn't aligned to climate realism or ecological realism, and it is imperative that we bridge the gap at least a little bit, that bit which makes our action much more effective than it is. This is a deeply realist book, but of a kind of transformative realism, right? Usually realism is, Michele Filippini, a professor at the University of Bologna, has written a very nice book on this. Usually realism is sided with conservative thought. Not at all. Of course, I know we both like Lenin, but you can have other figures on the left. The point is, we need to get there, okay? And this book is useful in doing that. In many ways, so I don't want to be longer than you because it wouldn't make any sense. So I'm just gonna say two things. One is particularly useful for the internal discussion of climate justice movements. You were referring at the end of your intervention about these ecology movements and other literature. For example, some people who are in this room, Marco, Ludovico, and others, we collectively just wrote last week the preface to the Italian edition of this book titled Neither Vertical Nor Horizontal by Rodrigo Nunes, which will be available in Italian very, very soon. And one of his points is precisely to say, and I'm taking a point you raised in our discussion, Ludovico, to address the issue of organizational ecology from a pedagogical perspective. We need to be better at finding the common enemy and proper relationships within the different parts of the movement. From this perspective, the book, which has very nice graphics, like where I can find a couple. Yeah, well, incredibly, I don't find them, but there are so many like this. It's super informative, and it explains very well how we should improve the way we interact with other parts of the movement for the climate justice. This movement and other movements which not necessarily have climate justice as their own goal, but if we work well, they will see climate justice as an enabler for their goal to be achieved. Like, it's not just alliance, it's convergence. Like, somehow you find, and we have had in Italy a little bit of experience with this reasoning. Let's do more and let's do it quickly. Like the issue of urgency is recurrent in the book, as again it should be. And the second element, and then I stop here, is that the book starts with climate science, but actually that start isn't the true start. Like, the start, the implicit start is, it's not really implicit because you state that very clearly, but it comes before, in my opinion, than the starting point of climate science, that this is not a novel, so they can say who the assassin is at the very beginning. So, like, we are dealing with a systemic problem with the mode of production, which is called capitalism, okay? And the relationship between our task and climate science is mediated by this failure, okay? Like, there have been attempts to manage the climate crisis, and it's precisely because those attempts have failed that we need to rethink politically what we have to do. And so this is the invisible starting point. Throughout the book, there are two moments instead in which what they say is basically either we are able to elaborate on the class content of our political proposal, or we are doomed to fail. Okay, and there are two moments. The first one is, if you want, a militant proposal to rethink the notion of labor in terms of, like, who is the working class? Like, what's the relationship between the political, technical, and ecological composition of working classes? And they propose this eco-feminist definition of working class, which in my opinion is extremely powerful at the political level. Then, of course, if you ask me to have the overall of a sociologist, we may talk a little bit more, but that's why there are volumes of 1,000 pages on what it is class today, which are interesting to me, but not that necessary for political mobilization. So what is here is totally fine with the discussion about how ecofeminism is the proper filter to look at class issues today, and that needs to be articulated and organized politically. And that's why, in the end, there is a discussion about how to involve the working classes in this. They touch upon issues of just transition, for example. Like, again, this is not at all, this discussion doesn't happen in a vacuum. We have experiences, okay? We have reflected on that issue, and that's probably here, I give an assist to you if you want to, elaborate on that, but after we have asked our comrades to jump in if they feel so. Climaximo, which is the political group from which Sinan and Mariana comes, this book is signed by them, they are accountable for this, but you can easily detect Climaximo as an experience looming around. Like, I know Climaximo, of course, because I've been in Portugal and because they are very good. One of the things I learned when I was in Portugal, and I tried to discuss with my comrades and my communities, militant communities here in Italy, was, well, there are these campaigns, climate jobs campaigns. This is one way of involving workers. And here in Bologna, with a group of young scholars, we have started a collaboration with FIOM CGL in the case of Industria Italiana Autobus, just to see, public transport, sustainable mobility is key if we want to actually get where we need to get, okay? how do we make workers our allies? And again, that dispute didn't end well, because even if the state was the owner in majority of that company, Industria Italiana Autobus, it was nonetheless dismissed and privatized. But let's see how it goes. Right now, in terms of the discussion today, it's not that important how these single disputes go. The point is, they made us look the right way. We need to involve other pieces of society. We need mass movements. Okay, it's not like we also need affinity. We need everything actually to go all in. But generally speaking, when I have seen this kind of honesty, self-criticism, and realism, I saw that ending with a call, and then you as an individual or your affinity group can do this, this, and this, and that. Because to build collective mobilization at the mass level, you need time. And instead, Mariana and Sinan told us, no, it's the right way of looking at the thing. Of course we are anxious because the task at hand is huge and our forces are small. Let's face it, because it's the only option we have. We need to be as good as it takes to bridge this gap and have mass movements very quickly. And this book gives some suggestions to get there. So I invite you to read that, or in any case to discuss with us. And thank you to Sinan, to Pua, to Bologna for Climate Justice for organizing this.
So, because this is not a lecture, and because I am a Turkish guy coming from Portugal, I would like to not talk more, and instead hear from everyone else, what is alive in you, more or less, what makes sense, what is bothering you. And maybe we pick from there and see if I can then pull that conversation back into the book or not. If I don't, then it's okay. If I do, even better. So just maybe start with questions, but also eventually it can be just random, thoughts that came out, things that are really, bugging in your head. You wake up and there's this thing. Or maybe you want to go to sleep and you cannot, so you have to get news or whatever. That kind of stuff I'm looking for, whatever is aligning you. There's a hand here. I'm not sure if there is any protocol about filming, because we are being filmed. But yeah, so anyway, I think that's stable now. There's one hand here. Is there any other? Maybe you can have your time to think.
Yeah, my question is, where does the power lies? I mean, I see almost forever people following where the power lies. But for our viewpoint, the power lies in mass movement. So this is a self-contradictory statement, because people follow power, but power is made by the masses. So where is the interruption of this vicious circle?
I'm not going to answer. I'm going to wait. So if I answer, I start talking, no?
Thank you, Sinan. So I read the book, as you know, and one sentence that really stuck with me was, as a climate justice movement, we call for system change, but we do not actually have a real plan to change the system, because, and that's where I want to go, because there is often a sort of disconnect between the day-to-day organizing of a movement that is locally, existing locally, of course, and as several challenges or issues coming up and needs to tackle and to address, and at the same time this huge, enormous task of we need to to conquer a global power, or we need to be at least effective on a global scale. And so that stayed with me, you know, and constantly interrogates me, because it is true. It's somehow we're spreading a lie, in a sense, when we do not have a plan to build a global power. So we say we want system change, but actually, you know, in the real actual struggle that we engage in, our demands or our claims or our requests or what we try to achieve is often very nationally based. And that's a little bit the disconnect I see, because as a movement, of course, we need to try to resonate with our you know, our fellow people in the country or in the region or in the city, and so we need to find, you know, things that are relevant to the everyday life, and that's also the issue, you know, with how do we get workers on our side. You know, we need to think in terms of desires and needs that are relevant on a local scale, and that can, you know, somehow also valorize the agency of people. Because one problem of the climate justice movement, you know, we want to global system change, but doesn't exist any agency really that is global in scope. So nobody has, you know, maybe those with the nuclear weapon have power to change the earth in a blink individually, but nobody has agency. And so we try to be effective and resonant to the people and to the scale that they have agency. And therefore, you know, we talk about let's make this city better, let's make public transportation free in this city, or let's force this company to abandon fossil fuel investments. You know, and that is where we constantly focus. So we have this, at most, a national horizon, even if we do speak about the global change. And, you know, I don't know where I'm going. It's just, you know, reflecting, like you invited us to do. But I see that this is a crucial thing that we need to talk about. You know, when we put as an horizon something that is unreachable, or something that is not even embedded in the day-to-day organizing we do, because in the day-to-day organizing we refer to the neighborhood, the city, or the state, at most. Where we think we do have an agency and we can convince others, hey, you do have an agency if you come with us to shape this process that will have an impact in your life, etc. And while I appreciate a lot the effort you make at thinking, you know, how do we connect these two, you know, the local and the global? The idea that comes up in the book is one of creating mandates. So having global coordination spaces where we send representatives, and these representatives have the mandate to represent us and take decisions on our behalf, and then bring back the decision and discuss with us. And it's a little bit like it works in mass action with affinity groups, and I really like it. But that also implies some sort of hierarchy, I think. So I was curious also what you think about this, and everybody else, you know, how do they live in the hierarchies, and these tensions between local and global, between having a representative and so some form of hierarchical or giving agency to that person for your movement, to have some sort of larger coordination, but at the same time losing ownership at the local level on that political planning. And that's it.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. few things that are kind of not like not answering, but more like reacting to a few things that I heard. I guess we identify something. We start with an observation, which is that we need some sort of actual existential convergence that comes from two sides. So two pipelines. One is climate-informed class politics, which is how I opened this conversation. Like doing the actual politics that that was being done for 200 years or more, depending on how you count, but with the physical understanding that, like, assuming simple facts about that are coming in our age at this time about that comes from climate science. But there's also, so that's climate-informed class politics. What you are doing, the actual activity is class politics. But you receive some information from somewhere. You're also receiving other information probably. And then maybe some of what Lele was saying was about more like class-informed climate politics. So understanding the climate problem from but getting informed about like class, all the analysis that was done before, like why do I have this problem in the first place, kind of stuff. Like that's what. So these are two different radicalization pipelines that are both happening to some extent, but because then if we actually get the information entirely like downloaded, then we don't have a theory of change. Like there's no strategy to then apply all of that. So there's kind of, it's very hard to hold that kind of stuff. And I think it's happening on both sides. Both from people coming from the climate side, they're like facing, oh wait, I actually have to handle I have to actually have a plan about like NATO tanks and, and not like NATO tanks attacking me, it's not like NATO tanks, it's all right. Like eventually we will be all in jail and there's a reason for that. But also coming from the other side, like people in doing class politics, and by class politics I mean all this, the larger intersectional kind of language, but I'm just gonna shortly say class politics about that. Like understanding, wait, maybe like it's the kind of stuff that we're doing, it's gonna be very hard to win if we don't have like material, physical, the basic background, material background that we have been assuming. So but when you say things like that, we need the mass movement, we need to involve everyone, all that kind of, we need to organize the communities and they're like saying, yeah, I have to do these things like really quick, but of course. So I think both are very anxiogenic, or they produce anxiety because we don't then have a way of being playful with them, being curious with them, like actually engage with it in a way that can give us further next steps or produce tasks, make us fall asleep at night and so on. I think the book is an attempt for that. So that's one thing I wanted to say. This thing of like, I think the book is about climate-informed class politics and class-informed climate politics. Another thing, I think I'll just start with you and then go. So there's this whole idea of like globalization versus local, like grounded activism, let's say, grounded politics that has feet that can stand somewhere, right? And that's kind of this idea of like translocal thinking, I think, is really curious. This thing of like globalization from the bottom to the left. That's what it said, like globalization from the bottom to the left, globalization of the working class stuff. I think that's really interesting. The only thing, and we're not saying, there's an entire webinar we did about globalization where this question came exactly in this form, and we're like, we don't know, you have to figure it out because we are not your context. So that's how we avoided that question. But there's a bit of the information that we have to take about what you were saying, which is, if you're in Greece, are you allowed to negotiate your debt? Because 10 years ago that was tested, the answer is no. The decision about your debt is not made in Greece. That decision is made in Brussels. And there's literally nothing you can do. People come together, they vote, they say, we don't want, but you're not, that's not how their sovereignty lies. For many of the local issues that we are fighting, the sovereignty does not exist at that level. It exists in a higher, more integrated global capital level, global capitalism level. And we have to come to terms with that and understand, okay, then what do I gotta do, right? And that's really tough. I think, so there's that I want to say in relation to to a little bit about like what is global versus globalization versus translocal stuff. There's one example I want to give very concretely, something that we did I think 3 years ago in Portugal. We were part of a group campaign or something that was called Glasgow Agreement. It was a global campaign of grassroots groups about climate justice, and we're like, disruptive action, we come together, we understand what's going to happen, and we'll take matters in our hands kind of language. And we were like, okay, one thing we can test is if we can come up with like an action together that we call for an action together. We come with a concept and we come up with demands and so on. We did an action called Collapse Total, or Total Collapse, and it was like a series of mass actions. It was about Total, the company. We did it in Portugal because basically the African comrade said this is what matters most, and the Americans aligned with that. The Latin Americans aligned with that, saying that's. I think that they said like there was a consensus in the room, like this seems like a uniting target because this company is bigger than most of countries, both economically and politically at this point. And we did an action in Portugal where there is no Total. The company doesn't exist, there are no operations, the logo never shows up anywhere. We had to come up with a way, because we had given the mandate. So the mandate here is like the hierarchy here, I think is kind of like actually giving that vulnerability to a space of like actually receiving orders from someone that you would very much like to receive orders from. And this is how we felt, like we received orders from Global South, we felt this way. And we're like, then we came home, like the people who went there, they came back and said, now we have a problem. There's this thing, we will do it, but the company doesn't exist, so we have to come up with like how we. Of course, we did an action in the refinery that kind of relates to our context and so on. We framed it, we did the work, we did the boring administrative work and talking points and whatever, like actually, so that it fits into the bigger picture. And it was an action against Galp, which was like the enemy of. So I think that is the kind of feeling that we are giving, not necessarily there is a Congress and there is this central committee. It may be that way in some situations, but in this situation it wasn't even that way. But we felt like, this seems like a space where we can listen to other people and actually get input and feedback and be open to that kind of stuff, like to decisions that come from there, and like because when you don't have that, typically, global coordination is always happening, right? The global coordination currently is happening the following way. In the global north, there are NGOs, and there is some academy also. They produce some idea and some narrative, some frame, and it trickles down to the rest of us. That's typical, because hegemony, basic hegemony structure. If you want to build something else, you really have to go to that level and build a different kind, like a counter-hegemonic approach to that. And that's where I want to go to the power stuff. Because I think there's part of this, like the social power in movements, masses, and so on. There's also the very typical analytical question that we didn't solve yet about like actually the power, the imposing power, where is it? Right? Where is capitalist power? It's not really a resolved question. The capitalists didn't yet resolve it after the collapse of World Trade Organization successfully by the altered globalization movement. They are not really sure where their power is. So then, if you want to contest it, it also becomes difficult. But I just want to say about like where does the power lie. I think what I want to say is that I feel really intimidated by trying to answer that question in Italy with all the references I will give is about Gramsci, and I'm just not going to break some eggs here. I'm just going to say, because this book exists and there is a website, in maybe a couple of weeks, a wonderful activist academic, Lawrence Cox, will specifically write about hegemony structures and how we can build, like how can we attack an existing hegemony, how can we build counter-hegemony and so on, specifically about like how does the movement versus existing structures work. They have, I mean, Lawrence and other people around have been doing amazing work around that, and I think, because I read the draft, so, because, you know. So I think that will answer most of your questions, but I'm just not gonna dare to go into Gramsci with you guys. So the last thing I want to say is something that you were saying, and it's in the book, we didn't say it, and I realized that if you don't say it, it's not clear. Complete failure, right? You said this, it appeared like, and I had started it, and then you picked it. There's this concept of failure that we have. It's very macho concept. It's very football-like concept of like, either you win or you lose. And if you lose, you fail, or you're a failure. So this is, it's, one of the main, I think, contributions of the book is to actually write this down. And we didn't invent it, but we wrote it down, and I think it was useful because not a lot of people are, like, you know, feminists have been saying these things, but like, you know, men are not reading that. So, having failure as part of a transformative project, having intentional smart failure embedded into strategy. So when we say failure, we talk about something that you want to do, not as something that is horrifying, something that is, so in smart failure, which means, this is not like my inventions, these are just, I'm just saying, parroting things that I heard from people more intelligent than me. So one thing of understanding smart failure is like not repeating the same failure, not repeating the same mistake. So when a lot of people talk about like long term, this is the first step, like we reject that. We say, this is not the first step of, and this book is not the first step of anything. This is the last step of a long-term movement learning process. There will be more steps, but we don't take it as like, this is the first step. When you say things like that, you're like, I just didn't learn anything from past experience, right? So thinking about long haul or long term, as in I'm at the end of it, not in the beginning of it, and get like, I'm just not gonna repeat the same mistakes. I'm just gonna invent new mistakes. So there's that bit, and being very explicit about when you want to make a mistake. Things like, we're just gonna, and sometimes it's very trivial, like we're just gonna do these 5 videos and put it on TikTok, and if it fails, yeah, okay. We spent this energy and maybe also even spent some money and so on. We were testing something, and we are monitoring very clearly if it's working or not, very disciplined learning process, and like if it fails, we are capable of saying this, failed. And then maybe you celebrate that, because then you can move on. And sometimes it's more strategic, like addressing a specific sector of the society, looking at a specific target and say, I'm just gonna do this, I think this will produce this will trigger something, maybe it doesn't, and that's all right. Like, that's the kind of taking risk, creating that kind of vulnerability and playing with that, I think is the kind of failure so when the book starts saying we have failed, we have to say this to ourselves, and then throughout the book it constantly has this daunting anxiety covering the book. But at some point we're saying like, by failure we mean this and not that other thing that is like just some scary avoiding, like some topic that we have to avoid. So just wanted to make this is not like, again, I don't think I answered any of the questions, like, but I'm just giving you some ideas. Other questions, comments? What is alive in you? What is bothering you? I want to know. I'm here, came all the way. I know some of the stories of what is happening exactly now. A bit longer to play. A bit one step back maybe. What is a bigger picture?
I would
Oh, please.
No.
Okay, so maybe I'm gonna say something very trivial, but I want to answer you. I mean, I don't really have an answer, but your question actually has bothered me for a long time. Like, what do we do between like the local and the global? Because my experience in Bologna, it was that it is super hard to do things together. Like, I remember on the 22nd of October, a few years ago, There was GKN, there was a big, I think I saw the poster over there, the flyer. There was a very big event in Bologna. It was about class and workers. It was very big, okay? And it was like a very important topic at that moment. And many political groups tried to join the event. And people told me it was hell. Like, to get an agreement, okay? So like anarchists and autonomy and the green and blah blah and probably fight Friday for Futures, like Legambiente, okay? There were many. So I think, and that's what I'm trying to work in my political group, is to focus on what do we do together instead, like with a good way. So, like self-organizing kind of anarchists, so with talking and trying to take every single point of view in the discussion and try to have an output so that more or less we all agree. What to do together and not like what do we think about things. Okay, because if we start talking about what do you think about Ukraine and what do you think about COVID and what do you think about Israel and Palestine, it's not gonna work. Like I think that we create enemies in between the groups because we fight too much about what the other person thinks and not about how he or she acts actually. Because like I don't know, I saw many issues coming out, like when, because then what does it produce? It produces groups that don't hold when a person does violence, because it's from your group, you know, like sectarism. I'm not sure about the English word for that, sectarian, like. So I think we have to really work on that and hold people account, not for what you say, but for what you do. So if you act violence, then you're accountable. But if you think, I don't know, like Israel is right or whatever, you know, bullshit. But, you know, it's okay. We are still doing this project together. Because if you agree to work on climate justice and stuff, then probably it's gonna work. Also because like what I say to my comrades is like, what do we do with these people in the end? You want to kill them or you try to convince them? So, so at one point, you have to come to that point in which you talk to people you really dislike the opinions of. That's my 2 cents.
So yeah, actually very briefly, I wanted to thank you, Sinan and Leonardi, for your contribution. And so in the last few days we had the chance to chat a little bit and talk about how the struggle for climate justice actually involves a larger struggle, so the social issues, the anti-capitalist struggle as well. And so when you talked about the urgency that we feel right now to really make a change in the moment, because there's no how do you say, there's no time left. I wanted to ask if the new scenario, the new world scenario that is defining on a global scale, is actually redefining the frame in which we have to think our action and the priorities, the timeline in which we imagine our struggles. So if I don't know if I've been clear, but how does war reframe our struggle of every day, if it does?
First of all, I think we were in the same illustration in this one back 20 years ago. But yeah, actually, I am one of those people. Like are really scared by failure, so thank you for your speech. Also because, not that I had seen, not that I saw the consequences, but I know that the consequences of a good plan, of having a plan, are bad for mood, for also for ties, for relationships, friendships, loving relationships. So yes, I understand what you say, but I see that ghost in that nightmare of a failure. I have Greek friends, so I know what the Hockey referendum did to their life and the failure did to their life. So no, but thank you for the topic. Actually, I think I wanted to ask you one thing about the creation of alternatives. We talked about having a counterpart. We talked about creating a relation. Maybe it's one of my feelings, and we are a bit working on this with Bologna Common Justice, the creation of alternatives. It's not easy in a European context, in urban context, but if you somehow dwell with this topic, because yes, the social movements against Troika, they failed, and maybe not all of them failed. In Spain, it was not so bad for some things. Maybe one of the things missing back to those years was the creation of alternatives, not just asking something, but doing something else. Maybe in Portugal it was very clear, in other places it was less clear. And I don't think the creation of alternatives is an alternative against saying something to the power structure.
Anything else?
Protesting.
Sorry. Anything else? Okay, so I guess one thing I want to say, I think these three questions were somehow they were completely connected to each other in my head. So Amilcar Cabral has raised this flag of unity and struggle, and this is very trivial when it's still the main slogan of the Guinea-Bissau party, independent African party. Unity and struggle, and there is a whole page, there's several pages of explanation of what that means, why this and anything else and so on. So he's basically saying this is our banner, that this is the banner we are lifting, because we want to unite the people in order to struggle, and as we struggle, we'll unite. So that is the kind of interesting contribution, very practical contribution that Cabral made, that I really, really enjoyed, because that is the kind of stuff that was going on in this conversation, right? About coordination, space, talking with other groups and so on. And it's messy, and it's supposed to be messy, because otherwise the groups wouldn't exist, right? If people agreed. So in the book, when we talk about movement as party, so this ecology of social movements approach, we use this ecological approach, and by ecological I don't mean some sort of romantic or environment it's a scientific approach of you look at a self-reproducing system, which is the social movement. You look at the social movement and you're trying to read it as you would read an ecosystem. So relationships, connections, antagonistic connections, things that shouldn't be there, maybe, so that kind of intentional reading that we do. So when we say ecology of social movements, we refer to the actual science of ecology. Because then you can ask questions like, when you look at an image of this kind, you can say, what kind of diversity is desired? Like, what kind of different things are desired? What kind of different things should be tolerated? So it's not exactly like I want to build it, but I understand that they should exist simultaneously next to each other. And maybe what kind of diversity should be avoided? That's also fine. Like, there's a lot of diversity. Like, in my body, which is a system, I don't want cancer cells, like, because it doesn't fulfill my intentions about what I want this body to achieve. So there is certain diversity that you may say, I don't want this, and it can be really intentionally like taking elements out of a movement. I think so. Just being curious and intentional at that like movement, looking at the movement, and I think that is why your questions are kind of, for me, filling into that perspective. So there are two ways in which I can answer you. One is really curious, is Efficaci in Twitter and Tear Gas. He talks about this movements of the square movements in 2010s, where she's referring to this very, she participated in all of these things. And one of the things she realizes is that wherever you go, in whichever part of the world, people always set up a library. She keeps on referring to it. People set up library knowing that it will be destroyed in 3 days. They don't care. They just bring the shelves and they put the books in. So as part of prefigurative, like the protest itself replacing the community or organization that you need. So this kind of prefigurative approach to the protest itself. Like, protest is not just to achieve something. People want to achieve things, but at the same time, it is the space of like building community, building relationships, building learning, and so on. So there's one part which is very much like that. The other part that I think you were referring more about, like, so this is the prefigurative capability of a movement. There's also the institutional capability of a movement, like actually articulating the world that we want to achieve, and maybe even articulating the institutions that would come with it, right? And those can be parallel power kind of stuff. It can also be these institutions should be doing specific, like existing institutions, but it can be just completely different institutions that we want to build. I feel that somehow there was a moment where people in the climate movement dared doing that with opening a serious debate about Green New Deals. And that was really an attempt of institutional capabilities. Like, and I read like 25 different Green New Deals, right? I'm not referring to some specific one, I'm just saying the fact that so many people discuss so many contested versions of how do we get from here to there, what are the institutions that will support it, like that conversation, the existing debate itself was the capability. And I think anti-austerity, yeah, there's a book called, I'm not sure if you're referring, it's called The Populist Momentum, that is referring to the square movements in global north, so in Europe and the US, and there they are talking about like what kind of institutional answers came and what were the successes and failures of it and so on. Yeah, there's an article about that in the website actually, specifically about this kind of work, like building the alternative. What is the alternative? How can you talk about, like, how can you articulate an alternative? Like, what are the words that you're supposed to be using and so on? So a lot of people did that kind of intervention where others were doing other kinds of stuff. And I think that is the kind of movement ecology, movement ecosystem you're looking at. Because when you say stuff like, what do we do about war? That question has completely different meaning. And this is why I want, like, that question is meaningless in Brazil. And that question has a completely different meaning in Lebanon. They're not like they will say like, yeah, war very important, yeah, but they're not talking about the same word that you're talking. Like, you know, that's okay. Like, first of all, like understanding there are different contexts and we are not supposed to address the same problems. But also you can say like, I don't think so. Like, it's okay that you make an analysis and you understand this scenario doesn't seem viable to me. I don't think it will happen. It's not probable. Or even if it happens, it's not going to produce any opportunities for me. You can say this, or you can say, this is going to happen, and there are these opportunities, and that these threats will show up, so we have to invest in that. So the kind of approach that we are proposing in the book is not, it's very prescriptive and not at all prescriptive at the same time, because we're saying, that question of like what should we do about war, if I understand you correctly, you're talking about European Commission influence space. So it's not the European Union only, but it's kind of the surrounding. So in that context, maybe those people should sit down and say, what do we think about that? As a strategic priority, is this relevant for us? If so, how? And if we do think this is relevant, what are we going to do? And who is going to do it? Because others won't think it's relevant, right? So some of us will say, well, actually, I think that floods are more mobilizing. They will like produce more radicalizing, and I can control it better because I can directly relate to it. And others can say other things, and we have to understand like why some of us are doing certain things, while others are doing other things. And we also have to understand how these things can feed each other strategically. And this is one of the main propositions in the book, actually, of like looking at different scenarios and investing resources to certain scenarios, but not all of us. And so that's the kind of diversity we're looking for when we say like movement level thinking and so on. You need to leave, no? Oh yeah, well, I was thinking about 10 minutes because I was going to suggest you say something.
No. Definitely, I spoke way too much. Thank you so much. No, I cannot risk missing this train. Yeah.
So let's.
No, thank you. See you tomorrow. Sorry, guys.
So these are the kind of like, again, as you notice, like I'm not answering anything. I'm just saying, because the whole point of like, I started this conversation saying we have the answers, they're all in the book. Simultaneously produced like showing you a book of 150 pages. So it's really there is a dissonance here. Like I cannot say I have the answers globally. Like I have the answers here for the genocide in Congo and simultaneously give you 150 pages. So I'm playing a trick here, and I mean, in the sense of I think we are giving a framework to look at a variety of topics and a variety of challenges that we have globally in social movements, while at the same time not telling any specific person to do specific things. And I think this is the position that I want to hold now, because I think that is what we are trying to do with the book. Other than that, we can talk about the war specific scenario, if this is worth or not. But the kind of discussion that we want to have is really that a group of diverse organizers coming together and analyzing opportunities and threats of different ways in which war can or cannot happen. And like, yeah, there is some militarization going on, but there may be an escalation, there may not be an escalation, like real life hot war escalation. We don't know, and we can prepare for several scenarios. And some of the movement people, like some of the people in the movement may say, very interesting, I'm just not going to do that. I think this other thing is more interesting. And then we just have to sit with that discomfort. So that's what I wanted to share. And to point out, like, I think we gave a horrible modeling here with like 7 men talked and 1 woman talked. I just want to give visibility to this fact. I mean, we modeled it horribly, but also like you are part of this. You can, I think, yeah, this can be contested. I just wanted to give it visibility. I'm not aware of any rules about this. Maybe we do have, maybe we don't have, but like just putting to the surface. Mental knowledge. Anything else that people would like to add or comment or question?
In different form.
How are people calling it a day? Are we okay? Does it feel like this was a lot? And it's not